Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Miocic Johnson, and you're listening to MMALatestNews.com.
It's time to roll, baby.
What is up, guys? Welcome back to MMA Latest. We're here for the MMA debate. I'm here with Reese, of course. We're going to talk about Jon Jones and Francis Ngannou, of course. Miocic defended his title at UFC 252 against Cormier, where the trilogy ended. And then Jon Jones made his announcement that he was going to vacate the light heavyweight title and then put on some muscle and go to heavyweight. Reese, Monday evening, we saw the news. What did you make of it? Of him, one, vacating the title, and two, almost putting the feelings out there that he's going to move up to the heavyweight division?
I think everyone's been expecting it for a while. But there was a lot of people, including myself, thought that might have been the last time we ever saw Jon against Dominic Reyes. You know, he was definitely an impasse with the UFC and big falling out in terms of money. So I think that he has cleared out that light heavyweight division. He is the king of that division. He's the best 205 pounder of all time, no doubt about it. So I think it is natural now for him to move up, and there's a hell of a lot of fights, especially towards the top of that division, that can really get him motivated, because I think what we've saw over the last few fights with Jon Jones is that he struggles to get up for the fights that don't make him excited. And he is a big fight. He really produces when it comes to it. So the fights against Stipe and Francis that are rumoured are definitely, I think we're going to see the best Jon Jones, but we've already saw two light heavyweights go up to heavyweight recently, and it hasn't really worked out for him. So he has to get that balance right of the weight, cardio, and everything to go with it. But we all know what Jon Jones is, a fantastic athlete, so I don't think there's any concerns with that. But I'm excited, and it's going to add another fantastic face to the very, very surging heavyweight division at the moment.
Yeah, definitely. I think for the light heavyweight division, it's good for them as well, because I think it was going to be a bit stale, because he was almost going into every weekend thinking that Jon Jones was going to remain champion. But similarly, you know, a lot of people are saying that he may be ducking the Dominic Reyes rematch, the fact that his last few fights have gone so closely, and many argue that the belt shouldn't be his anymore. The fact that he's coming into this one, is it possibly that he's cherry picking, that he sees his time at light heavyweight being done, or is it just that he wants that extra fight and that buzz about him again? Because, as I said, the last two, maybe three fights for Jon Jones hasn't been one that you're maybe sitting down waiting to see with anticipation. It's more like, oh, Jon Jones is fighting this week, I'll tune in and watch that.
I think it's a bit of both. I think he does have the right to kind of cherry pick his opponents. You know, people are always criticising Dana for letting Conor McGregor cherry pick his opponents. But when you're at the stature that these two are at, I think it's validated. And I think the temptation of heavyweight and the temptation of the big fights, because there are no big fights left for him at 205. The only one would have been Cormier, but you know, everyone was questioning whether Cormier wanted to cut down to 205 again. So I don't blame him for going up. And, you know, the biggest question is, does he go straight into a title fight? Does he have a warm-up fight first? We are going to find out a lot. I mean, hopefully he fights for the end of the year. That would be nice. But I don't think we see him until 2021 in that heavyweight division. So, but I'm excited for whatever news comes.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's difficult with Jon Jones. So obviously, the marketability factor and the business factor will play a big part into where and when he makes his heavyweight debut. Because obviously, you don't want to give him a Curtis Blaze or Derek Lewis or a tune-up fight, and he loses on his heavyweight debut, because then you lose the title fight and you lose all that money as well. Similarly, you probably don't want to see Francis Ngannou is the number one contender right now, so you probably don't want to see him on a sporting aspect be jumped ahead of by Jon Jones. But I think the name that Jon Jones brings and the marketability factor of that is, I was trying to make it on a narrative basis earlier, and we probably won't see Stipe Miocic for another year anyway, because he fights once, maybe twice a year if we're lucky, which is no discredit to him. Obviously, he's just gone through a huge battle with Daniel Cormier. But I think narratively wise, if I'm in Ngannou, does it pay better for him to say he beats Stipe Miocic for the title, make his first defense against Jon Jones, who's undefeated, or Jon Jones beats Miocic for the world heavyweight title? Of course, Miocic is the consensus greatest of all time. That builds Jon Jones's favorability in that bout, and then Ngannou comes in and beats Jon Jones and becomes his almost first legitimate loss. I think that would put Ngannou in a much better light than Ngannou winning the title than defending it against Jon Jones. But I think that's the fight everyone wants to see.
Yeah, I think everybody would like to see the Francis fight more than the Stipe fight. Because even though, out of this sort of triangle that we've got, like John Jones is by far the most skilled mixed martial artist. There's no doubt about that. I don't think anyone can question that. But when you step in there against Francis Ngannou, skills go out the window. Because if he lands, you're going out. There's no doubt about it. Stipe took a few hits in their first fight, but it was nothing substantial, nothing worthy looking at it going, how is he still on his feet? And John Jones has never really been hit all too much. He got hit against Gustafsson in the first fight, got hit a couple of times against Dominic Reyes, but he's never really been hit, and he's never been hit by anyone as hard as what Francis hits. So I think you are right. I think John deserves to go straight into a title fight at heavyweight. There's no doubt about it. I mean, we've discussed this before. Obviously, we've got Cody, who is a former champion. He's going down straight into a title fight. I think when you're a champion of a weight class and you're going up or down, you deserve to go straight into a title fight of a division you're going into. I just think you deserve that. So, as you said, with Stipe, he's only fighting once a year at the moment. He's just had 50 minutes in the cage with DC over the last 3 years. So he does only fight once a year. So maybe it doesn't make sense to do Jones versus Francis. But as Dana said, Francis is next in line, no doubt about it. He's been on an absolute tear since he lost those 2 fights. So is it fair to give Francis John? And if you do you do it as an interim belt? But I don't think we need an interim belt, as we've just had the title defended. Or do you do it as just a standard, I mean, you can't do it as a fight night, can you? Because that's obviously John Jones won't be headlining a fight night. But do you do that as a non-title pay-per-view, 5 rounds? I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see how they play this, and it all comes down to how quick Stipe recovers. Because if Stipe recovers relatively quickly and fights maybe at the start of the year, then that will give John Jones then time to put on the muscle to get his cardio in line with how much muscle he's got, and a weight needs to be perfected, that weight. And then we can see John Jones face the winner of those 2.
Yeah, it's be interesting. Obviously, if Miocic comes back, ideally we want to see him in December, January, just because December's the closest pay-per-view, which doesn't yet have a bout on it. And obviously, John Jones does have a tendency to fight in December. It'd be interesting to see what happens. It's also interesting that he dropped his title before, going for the heavyweight title, so to speak. You could, you see Daniel Cormier, who's the biggest rival. You see these champ status. The Conor McGregor's the biggest superstars in the game. Henry Cejudo, of course, went up. Amanda Nunes as well. So it was interesting for a competition aspect. I thought John Jones maybe want to match Daniel Cormier just because that rivalry is so close. And he did put tweets out on Saturday night being like, this almost dissecting how to beat Stipe. And he also said, which I thought was very eye-catching, was that every victory that Daniel Cormier has, John Jones takes a piece of it because he beat him twice. So I think it's interesting. And it's almost like, does he then want to go in and beat Stipe just to have that stick to poke DC with for the rivalry?
I do agree with that to an extent. I think it would have been, for that rivalry, but we've all, over the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years, that rivalry between Jones and DC has been memorable. It's been one of the best rivalries in the UFC. But I think that Dana was pressuring him into defending the light heavyweight belt against probably Reyes again. And I think that Jones didn't want to do that. As I said at the start, he only wants the big fights now, and he only performs in the big fights. So that Dominic Reyes rematch, whether you thought he won or whether you thought he lost, it doesn't get him excited, and he doesn't think he needs to defend that again. He's cleared out that division now. So it probably would have been nice for him to, maybe have one more defence of that title and then fight the winner of Stipe and Francis, and maybe try that double champ, as you said, with his biggest rival doing it as well. But like Conor McGregor, John Jones does what John Jones wants to do, and if you're Dana White and you don't let him do that, you're going to have a problem on your hands. And we saw that. We saw that with John. We saw that with Conor. We saw that with Masvidal as well. If fighters are now starting to realise how much they're worth to the company, and people like Donald Cerrone and Diego Sanchez have been blasted over the years for being a company man, for just saying yes to whoever's put in front of them, but I think it's refreshing to have fighters kind of know their worth and know what they're asking for. I liken it to the Paige Van Zandt situation recently as well. She knows what she's worth, and she wasn't getting that offer from UFC, so she goes elsewhere. And I think that's what we saw with John Jones earlier in the year, was he was threatening to be honest, I don't see John Jones going to another organisation. I think it's UFC or it's bust for him, so he could have retired, and he would have been allowed to retire and go down as one of the greatest of all times. But I think it is refreshing to see fighters kind of having their own way to an extent. So whatever John Jones wants to do, John Jones will do.
Yeah, it would have been interesting because obviously he did put a feelings out again about 2 or 3 months ago. And it's almost interesting, you mentioned Conor McGregor, that sometimes it feels like those two are having a battle between each other, who can stay on the good side for long enough. It seems to be whenever Conor McGregor does something good, we see something about John Jones coming up and vice versa. But it'd be nice to see them both get, some good wind under themselves and start really pushing their career up in a good light. Because obviously John Jones, we know, he's probably the greatest of all time, the greatest we've ever seen. But the fact that he's outside the cage, he's tested a couple, positive on a few occasions, dampens that sort of feeling towards him. But he is the best mixed martial artist in the organisation at the moment, in the world probably at the moment. And it's interesting to see him, finally make that move up, because it's always been tempted and, teased out there. Now we've got Steve Miocic champion. It'd be interesting to see how he did it 3-4 years ago when Kane Velasquez was champion, or at the Richard Doom. Is he maybe now thinking it's the easier route for him to become a heavyweight champion? Because him against Kane would have been a little bit different, do you think?
It definitely would have. I think that's one of the biggest things. I think he has been biding his time. He has been looking for that perfect opportunity to move up. As you said with Kane, like that would have been another dimension onto the AKA rivalry. Of course, with that long rivalry of DC, and you've got Kane in that camp as well. So it would have been a fantastic fight. And look, if he fights Stipe or he fights Francis, it's a super fight. So it's going to be a great fight either way. But I do think he's bided his time, and now he's coming in at the perfect opportunity for him. I think even he said it as well. It's like it is a blossoming heavyweight division at the moment. And I think like over the last few years with that division, I think we've had the problem where the top 10 have kind of all faced each other in some capacity. I think it was quite obvious that maybe Blade should have fought Ngannou, but then if you never knew the history and you didn't know that they'd already fought before twice, and obviously Ngannou won both, then you can't put them together, but they probably should have been put together. So I think he's picked the perfect time. Whenever John Jones tweets or whenever he has a fight lined up, it's just a different atmosphere around the whole company. So this is only going to be good for the UFC and for Dana White as well. So I'm excited.
Definitely. Did you think, just to rely on it, do you think there was any bitterness from John Jones to do it immediately after Daniel Cormier had lost and announced his retirement? We saw it happen when Nunes defended their title. Conor McGregor immediately came out putting tweets out, and everyone stopped looking at Nunes and went, "Oh, Conor McGregor's now the new news." And the same thing sort of happened this weekend with John Jones. Daniel Cormier was immediately old news because he's retired, and everyone's looking at John Jones saying he's moving heavyweight. Did you think there was any sort of, we know that Ryder was still there. They're never going to be best friends. So did you think there was any gamesmanship into him doing it almost immediately after UFC 252?
Absolutely. It's mental warfare, isn't it? And although obviously Conor McGregor has that mental warfare with every opponent, apart from obviously Cowboy that he just had, but where John Jones had that mental warfare, but only in the DC rivalry that he had. So I think he knew what he was doing, just like Conor knew what he was doing. Although Conor didn't have any personal vendetta against Amanda Nunes, it was just a case of. It's the same again when Conor tweets, everybody notices. And I think Jones knew that, DC's just gone out on a loss, which John Jones is probably happy about, despite what he tweets. He saw DC in pieces again, effectively. And I think he's took that opportunity and he's kind of shut down the retirement party of DC. So I do think that there should have been more of a deal made of DC's retirement, because the guy is one of the best, no doubt. So I think there should have been more made of that. But once again, as you said, John Jones tweeting that, it just takes all the limelight away from DC. So I definitely thought he knew what he was doing, 100%.
Definitely. I think Dana said that they're still planning on doing the Hall of Fame. So I could imagine that Daniel Cormier almost becomes the first name to come in, especially as it's happened after the fight. But we move on. There is obviously one name and one very scary heavyweight that is almost stopping John Jones from coming there, and rightfully so, is Francis Ngannou, who's now rightfully the number one contender. Dana White's come out and said he will be the next one to fight for the title, but we've also seen him say many things before and gone the opposite way. And as you said, that Ngannou's beaten everyone below him, the Junior Dos Santoses. Rosenstruck won this weekend. You could easily say, oh, put him in against Francis and Ngannou. They're two heavy hitters. They deserve to fight each other and we get a number one contender. But then you look back 3 months ago, you see Rosenstruck get knocked out by Ngannou. It's almost impossible to match him against anyone other than the champion or Derek Lewis for a rematch.
It is tough, and as I said, like you've got that top 10 that have kind of all fought against each other. But the problem when you fight someone like Francis is that, because obviously his last 4 fights haven't come out the first round, haven't come out. I think longest fight was like 1 minute 11 or something, 1 minute 12. So
I think it accumulates like 2 minutes 40 in the cage for his last 4 wins.
It's crazy. So when you go in and fight against Francis, if you lose, which is likely, in a spectacular fashion, which is likely, and then even if you go away and have 2 or 3 wins in a row, and then everyone's like, oh, how about we put him against Francis again? Well, then everyone just reverts their mind back to how the first fight between the pair of them went, and Francis demolished them. So it's hard to sit there and try and argue that he deserves to go in against him again. So I do feel sorry for Francis because he probably didn't need to fight Rosenstruck, but the problem that he's in is he has to keep fighting because he has to keep active, and that's where the problem with Steve only fighting once a year comes into it. Is that he's going to have to wait now probably until the middle of next year. So he's in such a tough position, but that's one hell of a scary man that you don't want to be in the cage against.
Yeah, definitely. You know, we saw him have that meteoric rise. He fought Overeem, came out, you know, in brutal fashion in that first round. Then he got his title shot, which I still to this day think it came too soon because it was only a month or 3 weeks after he'd knocked out Overeem. And he got catapulted to become this next sort of heavyweight giant. And then obviously he lost that bout, went to 25 minutes, had a good first round, but obviously Miocic overtook that and, you know, came to a very conclusive decision win. And obviously he came back against Derek Lewis, wasn't confident, and we didn't see the best of him or Derek Lewis in that bout. Again, he lost. And he's come back since then. Curtis Blades, Cain Velasquez, Junior Dos Santos, Rosenstruck, demolished him in quick succession. And as you said there, it's not like they've had a 3-round split decision where you can go, oh, that fight was close. Let's remake that fight. It's been clean knockouts in the first round. So you can't even go back and say, other than the Derek Lewis one, and Miocic, of course, you can't go back and say, oh, we should probably give that one another test.
Yeah, exactly. I think when it comes to the title fight, it was definitely too soon for him. You know, and over the past 3-4 years, Dana's had a tendency to throw fighters in there too soon. We saw it with Darren Till as well.
And Rosenstruck as well. He didn't need that fight with Ngannou.
Exactly, Rosenstruck, because Rosenstruck, when he fought over him, lost every single minute of every single round until he landed one punch at the end. So he definitely shouldn't have been in there with Francis. But as you said, though, you've got to be careful because it is such an amazing division in terms of one punch can finish it. Can Stipe knock out Francis? I'd say he probably can. Can Jones knock out Francis? No one knows because he hasn't, as we saw with Gustafsson and we saw with OSP as well, who moved up to heavyweight recently. It's hard to find that balance of, having the weight right. And ultimately, I just want to quickly touch on the Cormier-Stipe fight as well, is that I think something I realised, and it took me quite a while to realise, is that we saw DC in there, and obviously he had a fantastic heavyweight career before the UFC in Strikeforce. And obviously he had his first couple of fights in the UFC heavyweight. But I think we saw DC in there against a genuine heavyweight. And I think we saw that the further it got, the more tired he was becoming. And just how the more cardioed, pristine Stipe, who was in fantastic shape himself, kind of took over a fight. So, and that was the thing with Francis when he fought Stipe first time, is that he'd been only going 1-2 rounds at most in his entire UFC career. So Stipe was clever, and that was the clinic from Stipe. No one went in thinking that Stipe was going to win, but Stipe did what he had to do to get the win. So I do hope that Francis has learned a hell of a lot from that, but it's hard because, as you said, apart from the Derek Lewis fight, his next 4 fights haven't gone past the 1.5-minute mark. So how much has he learned? He still hasn't been taken down of note I can think of. There's no one really managed to take him down. Curtis Blades maybe took him down, but
maybe Stipe got a couple of takedowns, but it's few and far between. But anyone who's beaten hasn't been able to take him down.
Yeah, it's tough because of how little time he spent in the cage. No one knows how much he's learned and how much he's improved. So, I I think I said it before. Like, it's like with Sean O'Malley thing. Like, it's time to see just how much Francis has learned. So when we goes in there against Stipe, let's see. He could shock us all. He could just like still go in and knock him out in the first round, and then the question is still up in the air. Like, how good is Francis? Because when you've got power and like he's got in those hands, you don't really need to be amazingly skilled. And I think that's the thing with the heavyweights. And it's weird that you've got someone like Francis who is such a powerful hitter, and then you've got someone like Stipe who, when he fought Francis, was like, when you put the two of them next to each other, you're definitely picking Francis. So, and I think that's the beauty of MMA as well. So, it's important that Francis has learned from his mistakes.
Yeah, it'd be interesting, obviously, because obviously we know what Ngannou can do, but the fact that he's only spent 18 minutes in the fights he's won, it's less than the fight, in Miocic tonight. It's going to be interesting, the fact that, yes, he hasn't taken so much damage, but does the lack of damage almost outweigh, the lack of experience he's had in Octagon, where Steve Miocic, Daniel Cormier, who's been in there 25 minutes consecutively and consistently, they might have taken some damage and they've come across different scenarios and been able to deal with them because they've been through those wars. Whereas Ngannou, he went into that fight with the confidence expecting to hit Miocic and see Miocic fall, of course. But it's interesting to see what the balance is between taking no damage and needing that experience to learn and to grow yourself from.
Yeah, obviously, like as we said, like Francis has never really been hit either. So, I especially take it back to Rosenstruik, the knockout he had there, and when he was lunging in at Rosenstruik when he was on the edge of a cage, his chin was so exposed. And do you trust someone like Stipe to find that chin? You probably do. Because for me, one of Stipe's best knockouts was when he won the title against Verdum. On the side of a cage, and they were running around the side of the cage, and Stipe just dropped back and then landed one on the chin. And it completely ended the fight in a matter of seconds. And can Stipe find that chin? Yes. Can John Jones find that chin? Absolutely. And I think John Jones can find that chin in a different variety of ways than what Stipe can. So, like whoever gets faced up against each other, it's going to be so interesting. And as it's Francis Ngannou, we're all there on the edge of our seats. We're all effectively biting our nails, waiting for that first punch to land. And that's the great thing about heavyweights. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't know when something's going to happen.
Yeah, I think obviously my big question for the Jones particularly is how does he come in? Say if he comes in at 230, 235, that's great if he goes and fights Miocic because they're the same weight. But if he goes and fights Ngannou, who comes in on the scale at 260, 265, there's a huge 30-pound gap there, which he would have never had in his light heavyweight days. So obviously the maximum is 206. So even then it was only 1 pound. It's going to be interesting to see what, and I'd like to see almost a new division being made around that 230, 245, because we've seen so much success between the heavyweight champions in that weight class, or in that almost bracket, that weight class recently. And then we get 250, 260, weighted into the Ngannou, the Derek Lewis's, Rosenstruik's becoming a lot heavier on the heavyweight spectrum. But it's going to be interesting to see what Jones does with someone 20 pounds, 30 pounds heavier than him, and can he still get those sort of techniques and the skills that he shows at light heavyweight?
Well, exactly. As you said, he's never fought anyone of that size before. So, I mean, don't get me wrong. Like, I don't want to see Jones come in at like 250 because he if anything, he's hindering himself there. But yeah, I mean, like you probably guess he comes in at around 230, 235, that sort of bracket. And as you said, that's perfect for a Stipe fight. When you've got Francis, who's 30 pounds heavier, and like. And this is no disrespect to Dominic Reyes, but the power difference between Dominic Reyes and Francis Ngannou is on another. It's not even on the same scale. It's not even on the same 10 scales. It's absurd. So he's got to maintain the speed that he had down at light heavyweight, although he's not as fast as he used to be. And we've got to remember he's still relatively young as well. I think he's like 31 now. I think he is.
Yeah, 33. Early 30s. Yeah. He's coming into his heavyweight. Well, it'd be young for a heavyweight. Should he make debut now?
Yeah, it'd be young for a heavyweight, and I think he's got to use that to advantage because it's just going to be so interesting to see how he comes in, as you said, especially with the weight, because He's got to really have that to perfection. And maybe that's where having a warm-up fight maybe might help him. Maybe going up against a Rosenstrike. Obviously, Derek Lewis has just been paired up with Blades, but someone who weighs on the upper end of that. So he's got to pick right, and I'm sure he will. And I'm just really excited.
Yeah, it feels like we've been waiting for this 5 or 6 years, doesn't it? It's finally come
Yeah.
to that point. And it's going to be interesting, as you said, especially from a business point. You don't want to see, like, if we do put Ngannou Jones together, you're going to see one of them get burned and lose their title opportunity, unless it is an interim belt. That might add a little bit of spice to make it almost more sensible in the business sense. Obviously, you're not going to put John Jones in a 3-round bout on a co-main. He's a main event header. So it's interesting, but if you are the UFC, what path do you go down? Do you think you go down the sporting credibility and giving Ngannou the shot? Or do you think we've had a tough year with no crowds? John Jones is going to add an extra 400,000, 500,000 pay-per-view buys that potentially.
I think if I was Dana White, I'd obviously be thinking about those figures, as you just said. I'd be thinking about the money, trying to maximise the money. But at the same time, I don't think you can deny Francis another shot at the title. I don't know about you, but if I'm Dana White, I don't want to be the one to tell Francis he's not getting a title shot, because that's not going to end well. Yeah. So I think you do have to be careful. Look, it's going to be impossible to please everyone. Everyone in that little triangle, it's going to be impossible. You're not going to see John Jones in a non-title fight. I just don't see it happening. You're not going to see him in a 3-round fight. You're not going to see him headlining a fight night. So if I'm Dana White, I'm letting Stipe rest up. Although it didn't, as far as I'm aware, he hasn't had nothing wrong with his eyes, despite the eye poke. I don't think he's come out with any bad injuries. So I imagine we might see him at the start of the year, like January, February, even March time. Let those two fight, and then let John just bulk up the way he needs to bulk up, and then let John face the winner. I think that's probably the best way. I think that's the fairest way to go about it, because there's no denying Francis' title shot. Yeah,
do you think there's any... we've seen Brock Lesnar. I think we have to almost hate Brock Lesnar, because obviously when the first fight of the trilogy happened, we had Brock Lesnar come to the cage tempting to come back against Daniel Cormier. Obviously, that didn't happen. He thought Derek Lewis, Cormier did. And then we had that sort of 6 to 7 months where we was like, is Brock Lesnar versus DC happening or not? And then at the end, obviously, he announced his retirement. So we lost 7 months there. Then we had the rematch. Miocic got injured, so we had to wait another 10, 11 months. And it ended up being a full year before we saw the trilogy. It'd be interesting to see, is there an amount of money that you could give to a Cormier or a Lesnar and say, right, 5-round non-title bout against John Jones. Jones, Lesnar is everyone wants to see. Jones, DC 3. Do you want to give him 5, 10, 15 mil to DC and say, right, here's a great retirement fund for you. Let's have one more fight. Because we know he's probably got it in him. It'd be interesting to see what Dana can do. And again, I said this before, I don't want to see DC go out and whimper. I'd like to see him stay retired. But, if there's a little opportunity that arises there, it would be interesting to see how it could be explored and if it would tempt them back out of retirement.
Yeah, I think I said it in a group chat when we were watching the fight. It's like, I don't think that the last time we see DC will be on a loss and will be in an empty... It's not even an arena. It's like a warehouse. I like for me, like if I was in DC's shoes and the type of person that he is, we all know the type of person that he is, the sort of athlete that he is, and where he ranks amongst the best, you wouldn't want to go out like that. So, but as he says in his post-fight interview, like the only time he'd come back is for a title fight, and there's no title fights on the horizon for him now because Stipe's beaten twice. I personally don't want to see Jones DC again. Like, I think it's just one of those rivalries that Jones has got the beat in the DC, and I think it'd be the same result. In terms of Brock Lesnar, I think it would be nice to see him back in the UFC, but I think if it was going to happen, it would have already happened. As you said, when he was meant to fight DC and everyone was questioning whether it was going to happen, I think that would have been the perfect time to bring him back. But he didn't do it, so I don't see Brock Lesnar coming back. But if you do add Brock Lesnar into the mix, and you do add someone like a Daniel Cormier into the mix, and then it definitely opens it up for John Jones. It gives John Jones literally 4 options then, instead of the 2 that he's got. So it would be intriguing, and it would be nice to see Brock Lesnar come back in. But I think it's going to be hard to fit them all in and keep everyone happy.
Yeah, the other opportunities for myself to look at is probably maybe go back with OSP at heavyweight or Gus. I don't think Gus wants to become a feeder to John Jones because they didn't look great in the second one. They looked great in the first against each other. The second one in John's favour, so it doesn't really want a trilogy. The OSP one could be good because they both come in at similar weights for heavyweight anyway. And obviously that was almost the closest fight we've seen to John Jones before everything happened with his, he came back up. Was that after he got caught for steroids, I believe? I think it was after then. So it would be interesting to see if we do an OSP or something like that, bring it up to heavyweight perhaps, and just give John a nice, almost easy feeling. But we don't see that in MMA. That's more the boxing tactic.
Yeah, that's definitely more. It's definitely more a boxing thing where you kind of, if you've got a fighter waiting for a title fight or a big fight, they have like a little tune-up fight, like a little 8-rounder or a 10-rounder. But especially when you've got someone the stature of John Jones, you're just not going to see that. And I think I go back to even 6, 7, 8 months ago. I think it definitely was discussed online. If Jones went up, maybe it would be logical to put him against a Gustafsson or an OSP. Both light heavyweights, both moving up to heavyweight, so you get a good idea of kind of where you fit against each other, and then where you fit in the division. But the Gus fight again, Jones has beat him twice, and it was pretty convincing in the second one. And as I mentioned loads of times already, he gets up for big fights, and that was the best version of John Jones we've saw since he come back out of his suspension. So for me, I think that maybe you could put him against the winner of Blades and Lewis. Obviously, they fight in November, so it's not amazingly far away, and that's sort of the right timeline. Obviously, Derek Lewis is planning on cutting a bit of weight. I think he said he wants to get down to 245, 250. So that will be interesting to see how that plays out. But he's in such a tough position, John Jones, but at the same time, on the flip side, he's in such a good position because he can just wait it out and just see how all this plays out. And I know I think that's Dana's favourite saying is let's just see how all this plays out, and then we'll just reevaluate it from there. And I think that's the best way for John to go about it.
Yeah, 100%. It is how it works. You put John Jones. Obviously, they would talk about the Ultimate Fighter. You put Jones and Miocic in there, or you put Jones and Ngannou. Let them have 8 weeks together and really got a rather again. You had it in February, March, the big title fight there. Because I think the question about Paulo Costa wanting to do the Ultimate Fighter, it's too close to that now for them to be doing it.
Yeah.
But John Jones heavyweight debut on the Ultimate Fighter with Miocic as a coach on the other side. I think that would do the numbers for the Ultimate Fighter because it's become a little bit stale in recent times. The event series has almost become the number one show for the UFC in terms of building up fighters and promoting new talent. But if you did Miocic, Jones with a heavyweight title on the Ultimate Fighter, I think that would get everyone's almost blood boiling and, get everyone excited to see that fight. But I think everyone wants to see, finally, John Jones at heavyweight. It's just be interesting, as you say, who and when.
Yeah, I think I would be a fan of going down that the Ultimate Fighter route. I think that would be a good way. Because even though John Jones has been talking a lot of talk online, he doesn't really have a simmering rivalry with either Stipe or Francis. There's no bad blood there. It's just almost selling a fight. So as you said, maybe those 8 to 10 weeks in the Ultimate Fighter, you're with each other every day, with each other for 5, 6, 8 hours a day. Maybe that is a perfect sort of thing we need to do to maybe build a rivalry between whoever he fights. But once again, though, if it is Stipe sitting out, then you might do John and Francis as coaches. But I don't really see Francis as a coaching type, if that makes sense. I don't really see him as...
Jones is the best coaching type either. But
he's not, no. But I think you kind of look at Jones as, Jones can, if Jones speaks and you're you've got normally 10 or 12 fighters, haven't you, out of the way? They're sitting there, you're listening to John Jones. There's no way you're sitting there kind of wondering what you're going to have for dinner the next day or something. You're listening to John Jones. And I just don't feel like you get that with Francis. People will want to listen to him because of how scary he is. And people maybe even feel forced to listen to him. So if they don't listen to him, then you're going to get put in a cage with him, and that's not going to end well. But I think I would be a fan to go down that Ultimate Fighter route. I think that might be a good way to build a fight, and especially with no fans. If we can start the Ultimate Fighter and then towards, as you said, February, March, April sort of time, fans might be back in the arena then, even if it's only a half capacity. So that might be a fantastic way to build that up and to get the fans on side for it.
Well, we'll see Dana White interact with it, because I'm sure he'll be interested in that one. We've done his job for him there. But yes, I think unanimously Ngannou deserves the next shot, and he should get the next shot. It just depends on situations. So even then, we might be looking at December, January time. We might have fans back in the arena. It might change everything. And it's really interesting to see, and obviously Miocic's time out, how long he's going to be out. Because he could come back and say next week, right, I'm ready for January, February. But I think that's a good place to leave it on. Reece, where can I find you?
Reece Man UFC on Twitter, and obviously follow. All the links will be down below for the team as well. We've got a load of good stuff coming up, and got some really, really, really good fights coming up, title fights as well. So make sure you stay tuned, and yeah. Yeah,
especially with now UFC 253 becoming a double-header title fight with the light heavyweight title on the line, of course. I think that one could be incredible. And we've got Bellator cage warriors coming back in September doing double and triple headers. The whole of the MMA world is back, especially after we had 3 months of just the UFC, despite them bringing us the best fights probably in recent times. But yes, make sure to hit subscribe, make sure to hit like, and comment down below. John Jones off Martin Ngannou next to Steve Miocic. Who do you want to see fight for that heavyweight title? And of course, we'll see you guys in the next video.